They were the last royal family of Russia, a dynasty born in splendor and ended in blood. The Romanovs ruled for more than 3 centuries, shaping one of the largest empires in human history. But behind the gold and grandeur lay secrets, betrayal, and tragedy so deep that their story became one of the darkest chapters in modern history. This is the rise and fall of the Romanovs, Russia's last dynasty. The story begins in the early 1600s when Russia was torn apart by chaos. It was known as the Time of Troubles, a period of famine, war, and political collapse. The throne was empty, and the nation was desperate for stability. In 1613, a young man named Mikhail Romanov, only 16 years old, was chosen as Tsar. His election marked the birth of the Romanov dynasty. The people believed he would bring peace after years of suffering, and for a while, he did. Mikhail's reign brought order, and his descendants expanded Russia's borders far beyond what anyone imagined possible. Generations later, the Romanovs became one of the most powerful royal families in the world, rivaling the great monarchies of Europe. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Russia under the Romanovs stretched across 2 continents. The empire covered vast forests, frozen tundras, and rich lands filled with minerals and oil. St. Petersburg, their capital, was a city of breathtaking palaces, art, and architecture, a symbol of both beauty and dominance. Tsars like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great reshaped Russia into a modern European power. They built universities, reformed the army, opened trade with the West, and filled their courts with foreign artists and thinkers. Yet, as the empire grew richer, the gap between the royal family and ordinary Russians widened dangerously. While the Romanovs lived in unimaginable luxury and with diamonds, silk, and golden thrones, millions of peasants lived in poverty. The people toiled on farms, paid heavy taxes, and had little freedom. Many were serfs, bound to the land they worked on, almost like slaves. The imperial family saw themselves as divinely chosen rulers. The Tsar was not just a monarch. He was believed to be appointed by God himself. That belief gave them absolute power, but also isolated them from reality. As revolutions swept through Europe, the Romanovs ignored the growing storm within their own empire. The seeds of rebellion were quietly taking root. In 1894, a young man named Nicholas Alexandrovich Romanov became Tsar Nicholas II. Gentle by nature and deeply religious, Nicholas was devoted to his family but unprepared for the weight of ruling a modern empire. He married Alexandra Feodorovna, a German princess and granddaughter of Queen Victoria of England. Their love story seemed like a fairy tale. 5 beautiful children, elegant palaces, and a nation that appeared loyal. But beneath the glittering surface, the empire was crumbling. Industrialization was changing Russia fast. Workers in factories demanded rights. Soldiers were exhausted by endless wars, and peasants were starving. Nicholas, however, believed it was his divine duty to maintain absolute control, no matter the cost. In 1904, the Tsar and Tsarina had a son, Alexei, the heir to the throne. But soon, tragedy struck. Alexei suffered from hemophilia, a rare blood disease that made even a small injury life-threatening. Desperate for help, Alexandra turned to a wandering mystic from Siberia, Grigory Rasputin. Known for his strange powers and hypnotic eyes, Rasputin claimed he could heal the boy. Miraculously, Alexei's condition sometimes improved under Rasputin's presence, and the Tsarina became convinced he was sent by God. But Rasputin's influence over the royal family scandalized the court and angered the public. Rumors spread that he controlled the Tsarina and, through her, the Tsar himself. Ministers were fired, decisions were made in secret, and the empire's leadership became a web of corruption and superstition. The Romanov dynasty, once respected, was now mocked and despised. In 1905, frustration exploded. Striking workers and ordinary citizens marched peacefully toward the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, demanding reforms. They carried portraits of the Tsar, believing he would listen to their cries. But the imperial guards opened fire. Hundreds were killed. This event became known as Bloody Sunday. It shattered the image of the Tsar as the father of the people. Nicholas was forced to sign limited reforms, creating a parliament called the Duma, but he continued to resist change. The wounds from that day never healed. The faith of the people in their ruler was broken forever. When World War I began in 1914, Nicholas saw it as a chance to restore national pride. Millions of Russians went to war, but they were poorly equipped, poorly led, and unprepared for the brutal modern battlefield. As the casualties mounted, food shortages struck cities and soldiers began to desert. The Tsarina, left to govern in Nicholas's absence, relied even more on Rasputin, deepening the public's hatred. By 1916, even members of the royal court had enough. A group of nobles plotted Rasputin's assassination, poisoning and shooting him multiple times before finally killing him. Yet it was too late. The dynasty's fate was sealed. By early 1917, revolution had erupted. Soldiers refused to fire on protesters, and chaos spread through Petrograd. Nicholas II, returning from the front, realized his empire was gone. On March 15, 1917, he abdicated the throne, ending 304 years of Romanov rule. The royal family was placed under house arrest, first in their palace, then in remote Siberia. At first, they were treated with respect, still seen as nobles. But when a second revolution brought the Bolsheviks to power later that year, everything changed. In July 1918, the Romanovs were moved to a small house in Yekaterinburg. The once grand rulers of Russia now lived in silence, guarded by soldiers loyal to the new regime. They still prayed daily and clung to hope that they might be rescued by loyalists. But on a dark night, July 17, 1918, their story came to a tragic end. The family was awakened, told they were being moved for safety, and led to a basement room. Moments later, gunfire echoed through the night. Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, their 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, were all executed. It was the end of the Romanov dynasty. For decades, the truth about their deaths remained hidden. The Soviet government denied everything, and rumors spread across the world that some of the children, especially Anastasia, had survived. Countless women later claimed to be her, fueling movies, books, and legends. It wasn't until 1991 that archaeologists discovered the Romanovs' remains buried in a shallow grave in the Russian woods. DNA tests confirmed their identities, closing one of history's most haunting mysteries. In 1998, nearly 80 years after their deaths, the Romanovs were finally laid to rest in St. Petersburg, the city their ancestors had built in glory. The story of the Romanovs is not just about the fall of a dynasty. It's about the collapse of an entire way of life. Their fate became a symbol of how absolute power, isolation, and pride can destroy even the mightiest empires. Today, their palaces stand as silent witnesses, filled with portraits, jewels, and echoes of a vanished world. Some Russians revere them as saints, others as tragic figures who lost touch with their people. But their story remains one of the most powerful reminders of history's fragility, how the line between royalty and ruin can vanish overnight. From divine right to downfall, the Romanovs' journey is a timeless warning about power, faith, and destiny. Empires rise and empires fall, but stories like theirs never fade. If you found this story as haunting and fascinating as we did, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into forgotten chapters of history, because sometimes the past tells us more about ourselves than we realize.